Bass Premium Pale Ale.
Life is too short to be drinking shitty beer.
Welcome to another edition of Bands, Bikes and Booze Reviews. Today I have got a piece of British brewing history in my hand. However, it's not what it used to be. I'll get onto this in a minute. You've probably seen this around. If you're in the States, I'm sure you've seen it. If you're in the UK and you're of a certain age, I'm sure you'll remember it growing up. That red triangle was everywhere. And I do remember that growing up as a kid, because where I lived in Tottenham, there was a brewery warehouse. And originally, it started off as Charrington Bass. That's my earliest memory of it. And I remember the lorries coming up my road every day. Where I lived in Tottenham, I lived right on the edge of an industrial estate. I mean, the part of Tottenham I came from, I mean, no disrespect to anyone who comes to Tottenham, but it's not the most, sought after area in London. But the area where I lived at the time, it was right on the edge of an industrial estate. Yeah, you can imagine the pollution, the noise, etc. But I do remember the Charrington Bass lorries going up and down the road. And I remember as a kid, I must have been about 5 or 6 years old, I said to me, Dad, I want to get out to work and do a proper job. I'm fed up with school. And yeah, fuck it. I definitely didn't know what I was letting myself in for, but I remember saying to me, Dad, it was on a Sunday as well, and he walked me up to the Charrington Bass distribution centre, and there was a lorry driver. He just got out, and he said, is there any chance of a job for him? And he looked at me and he went, nah, he couldn't see over the steering wheel, we can't give him a job. And I was really insulted. But yeah, that's my earliest memory of Charrington Bass. But they were based in Tottenham, or not the brewery, sorry. There was a distribution point that was based in Tottenham, and that was down my road, and that's my earliest memory of that. But you'd probably have seen that around. Shandy Bass, I'm sure if you live in the UK, you've seen cans of that around. Bass was everywhere. It was ubiquitous, as they say. But it's got a very, very rich history. And if you want to do a discerning history of British brewing, you cannot leave out Bass and their contribution to British brewing. Now, they've been going since 1777, which is a fairly long time, but it was founded after the Guinness Brewery, and it was obviously founded after Shepherd Neame, who are the oldest brewer in Britain. And the owner, William Bass, he came to the party quite late. He was 60 years old when he decided to get into brewing. Before that, he was into logistics. I mean, obviously, this is the 1700s, the late 1700s, so it would have been horse and carts, barges, etc. But he saw how popular beer was becoming, and he'd accrued a lot of money from his haulage industry, his logistics industry, or his business, I should say, and he decided to go into brewing, and this was at 60 years old. And he decided to set up in Burton-on-Trent. Not big for any particular reason, but there was some good reasons to set up there. It was quite central. It was close to Manchester, which of course at the time you had the Manchester Ship Canal, which was basically the lifeblood of the UK. The canals at the time, you've got to remember, the railways were very, very much in their infancy. Road transport was very basic, and most of the stuff that was moved around the country, most of the goods that were moved around the country, did use canals and barges. So that's why he moved to Burton-on-Trent. The fact that the water there was very good for brewing was incidental. He was more concerned with the access to Hull. Now, Hull was and still is a big shipping port in the UK. I don't think it's the biggest. I think Felixstowe is the biggest, but it was a big shipping port back then, and it also was the jumping off point to markets such as Russia, and of course these brewers were exporting stuff to Russia via the Baltic ports, and of course Hull was the, as I say, the jumping off point to that. But you had several types of brewer that were based in Burton at the time, so Bass wasn't the first, but he quickly became very popular, and I think the reason for that is because his beer was good. And it got to the point where in 1877 he had to trademark that red triangle because so many other brewers were copying it. And why were they copying it? Because at the time Bass was the biggest brewer in the UK. There was no other brewer that was bigger. Their beer had become so popular both in the UK and in the British Empire that it was everywhere. And as I say, brewers were trying to copy it, and he trademarked that. And if you look at the history of trademarks, the Bass triangle was the first ever trademark that was patented in the UK. And yeah, it obviously went from strength to strength. They bought out Charrington's and became Charrington's Bass in the, I think it was the 60s. And they were just huge. They really did corner the market when it came to certainly ales. Now, Bass owned quite a lot of pubs as well, Charrington's pubs, and they sold their beer through them. Eventually, during this, I think it was the 60s or 70s, the Monopolies Commission looked at or investigated the brewing industry, and it wasn't until a bit later on, I think it was in the 2000s, that they realised that the brewing industry in the UK was a bit of a closed shop. If you wanted to try and get into the brewing industry, and obviously there was a lot of little independent brewers, but to get into marketing your beer through pubs was very, very difficult because all the big brewers had that market cornered off, and they decided to chop them up. And eventually Bass got taken over, and they were taken over by Miller Coors, one of the big conglomerates, one of the big macro brewers. Eventually that was taken over in turn by ABInBev. Now ABInBev obviously are huge. They're as big, arguably bigger than Miller Coors, and they're the ones who currently own this label. Now unfortunately the brewery's closed. There's no real remnants of the brewery as such. I think there's a brewing museum in Burton which is built next to where the brewery used to be, but Bass as a going concern doesn't exist anymore. ABInBev have bought the intellectual rights, which allows them to brew a beer of their own recipe and put this Bass label on it. So what you've got here now is not really, well, it's not brewed by Bass, put it that way, and it's not a Bass recipe, I wouldn't have thought. But it's still popular, believe it or not. You can get this over here. You can get it in the United States as well, so I'm told. And it's brewed in Belgium, and it's brewed in the UK. Now in the UK, it's brewed in the same brewery they brew Boddington's. And if you've seen my review of Boddington's beer, you'll know that it's effing dog shit. So I'm hoping that this isn't going to be. So that's a little potted history of the Bass Brewery, and I really have skimmed over a hell of a lot of stuff. I could even do a whole video about the Bass Brewery. I don't know whether you're interested. Somebody complained the other day that I spoke too long about the history of the beers, and I should just get onto reviewing the beers. But I'm I wouldn't say I'm a history buff, but I'm a fan of history. I like the history of things. So that's why I'm giving you this brief rundown, or why I do give you brief rundowns of breweries, of the beers that I review. If you don't like it, well, let me know in the comments, and if there's too many people saying it's boring, then I won't do it anymore. But I think it's interesting. But there you go. Anyway, enough about that. Let's get on to this beer. Right, Bass Pale Ale. Premium Pale Ale, I should say. Trademark number 1 since the 18th century. Yeah, well, that would be 1777. This is saying it's brewed in Great Britain. It is. It's brewed up in Manchester. What have we got on the back? Due to Bass's popularity, competitors often forged the boss. Fucking hell. Do you know what? My old man, when I first started playing bass guitar, I remember explaining to him that, what a bass guitar, and he just couldn't, it just didn't compute that it, because it was spelled BAWS, that it was bass. Are you playing your bass guitar? Fucking hell. He plays the bass in a band. Oh, bless him, my old man. What does it say on the side? Yeah, due to their popularity, the competitor often forged the bass triangle on their labels to emulate Bass's success. As a result, in 1876, the distinctive bass triangle was an iconic symbol and the first trademark to be registered in the UK. Yeah, as I just told you. Brewed in Great Britain since the 18th century, Bass Ale is richly fragrant, has a wonderful hoppy bouquet and a bright chestnut hue. Does it really? Well, there you go. Ingredients. Now look, alarm bells on here. I've got this in Asda, by the way, and I have to say, Asda, I went to the Asda in, where was that? That was in Ashford in Kent, and it was piss poor. The selection was piss poor. But look at the ingredients. Water, barley malt, maize. That seems to be a thing with ABInBev, and that's a shortcut, and it doesn't taste great. So that's a trademark of ABInBev, and that's how they cut corners, and that's how, I wouldn't say they rip you off, but that's why, in my opinion, a lot of their beer is substandard, because they do things like that. No British brewer worth their salt would even entertain the idea of putting maize into a beer. There's no need for it. We have an abundance of arable land in the UK, so we can grow malt to put in beer. We don't need to chop the grain bill on this and just throw a load of maize in there. I don't know, it winds me up. When I see it with sort of South American brewers and other brewers who have perhaps not got that arable land to grow malt, or they need the malt for more important things like, you know, making bread and foodstuffs, etc., then I can half understand that. But in the UK, there is absolutely no fucking need to put maize in beer unless you're cutting corners, unless you're trying to sell, well, you're not trying to sell, you are selling an inferior product, in my opinion. But there you go. So it's got maize in it, it's got hops, and it's got hop extract. And that's about it, really. Bass Ale, brewed in the UK for ABInBev UK Limited. Blah, blah, blah. ABInBev, of course, are Belgian. Well, there you go. That's what you're getting now. Maize. You would not get maize in the original recipe. So, without further ado, let's get it into the glass. Well, no, we won't. We won't get it into this glass. Look at that. Can you see that? That is disgusting. That's where it's been laying down. I've got to go and clean that glass. Now, I'm putting it in a Bass glass because I couldn't really put it in another glass. But before I do, that has got to go and get cleaned. So, I will see you back here presently. Right, glass is a little bit cleaner, hopefully, and let's get it open. We have a little visitor down there as I was going out to clean the glass. Little Percy came into the room. He's sitting down there. If you hear any strange noises, that'll be him. There you go. There is the Bass logo. Iconic. That is the only way to describe that. Unfortunately, what ABInBev are putting in their net. Well, I shouldn't really be saying that. This may be a nice beer, so I'm gonna give it the benefit of the doubt. And I'm not saying ABInBev are 100% crap, because I quite like Jupiler, which is a Belgian Pilsner that they produce, and I think that's really nice, and it's got maize in it, and I really shouldn't like it. But wow, there is some aroma on this. What the hell? That is aroma, which is unheard of. And it's a sort of a biscuity caramel malt and a little hot bitterness to it as well. Wow. I wonder, well, I was going to say I wonder if they've taken a bit of a care because it's such an iconic label, but they haven't, because they put effing maize in it. Why would you do that? It does smell nice though, I have to say. There's a... Oh, hang on. No, there isn't. No, I thought there was some nasties in there. There isn't, actually. And yeah, the aromas are quite big. That's really unusual for ABInBev. And they do say on this to drink it slightly chilled. So that's what I've done. I've chilled it up. This is not a room temperature or cellar temperature even. This is slightly chilled. Oh, sorry, I should have said this is a 500ml bottle and it's 4.4%. But yeah. So far, the aroma isn't too bad. Let's see what it tastes like. Good Elf. That really does remind me of 70s beer. Now I remember at Christmas, my old man, before he was banging to the Guinness, he used to get cans of Long Life, and I would have been about 12 or 13 years old. And that's what this is reminding me of. I will say there's no nasties in that, but the flavours are quite insipid. There's a suggestion of biscuit malt and caramel malt, which aren't big. There's a vague hoppiness to it. I mean, they're giving it the big and about, there being a lovely hoppy bouquet on it, but there isn't really. There's a little bit of an aroma, I will say that. I'm not saying it's completely bland, but it's just boring and uninspiring. The finish is vague and it's sort of caramel malt. There's a slight hot bitterness to it, like a peppery bitterness to it. And so even Percy's crying. You can see what they've done to this beer. But to be honest, and I'm probably, and a viewer did point this out, what you remember is not a very accurate description of what the beer tastes like. So I'm probably remembering the stuff my dad used to drink, because he did on occasion get some of the Charrington's beer, and it was some of the Bass Pale Ale. This is before, as I say, he went on to the Guinness, and at Christmas he'd get all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff in, as I say, Long Life. And I would, of course, would hoist a can or two off of him and have a few swigs, but this does remind me of 70s beer. So have ABInBev actually done anything bad, or are they just in keeping with what this beer would have tasted like in the 70s? I really don't think so. This certainly wouldn't have tasted like the stuff that was being exported and drunk in the UK during its heyday around the turn of the century. But it's an inoffensive beer, and it's not really leaping out at me and saying, look at my amazing flavours. Well, is that a hint of aniseed that I can taste on that? Very, very subtle hint of aniseed. Interesting. I think is that one of the characteristics of Northdown hops? They've got tea and aniseed in there. I wonder what hops they've used in here. And there's hop extract in there too. So corners have been cut, but they were cut in the 70s as well. So again, I'm not going to say, oh, ABInBev are taking the piss, they've got no respect for tradition. This is kind of what it would have tasted like in the 70s, to be honest. There is a definite hint of aniseed in that, which is really interesting. I don't know where that's coming from. Could be some type of adjunct, some type of sweetener, possibly even a flavouring as well. It could even be from the hops, I don't know, who knows. But it's definitely there, which is mildly interesting on there. But as I say, the dominating flavours on this, you've got to remember these are subtle, that is aniseed. It's very subtle, but I can get it on the aroma now as well. Wow. Wow, what have I done? I mean, that's different, I will say that. And I quite like aniseed. And you get it in certain beers, and it's subtle. It usually is subtle, and it usually does come from the hops. So, wow, I wonder what ABInBev have done on this, what sort of approach they've taken to it. It's a very inoffensive beer, and I'm warming to it, which is unusual for me, because for me it's usually flavour that gets me going. But I think if you're eating like a steak pie or bangers and mash, something with gravy, even a roast dinner, this would be nice, because that's what you want, in my opinion, with a roast dinner. You want something like this. When you're eating, I don't think you want a really, really flavoursome beer. You want a palate cleanser, because the beer isn't the focus. That's my approach anyway. And I could be speaking out of turn, but I don't normally eat and drink at the same time. It's rare. I will do it occasionally, but certainly when I'm out, I'll never go out and have a meal and order a beer and that'll be it. Except when I'm with the missus and we're out on holiday and I'm not on a fucking session. I was out last night. I went to see a band last night, a local metal band, and Jesus, I was drinking Amstel. Christ almighty, that is the most boring fucking beer going. But hey ho, it was that or Kronenbourg, and yeah, you know my views on Kronenbourg. Anyway, let's skip out of that cul-de-sac and get back to this stuff. But general synopsis is not big flavours, more of a palate cleanser, little bit of caramel malt, little bit of hop bitterness, I should say, but not too bad. I'm quite surprised. I had visions of this going into a rant and saying, oh, what have they done to Bass Pale Ale? And I'm thinking I really do need to stop having these rose tinted memories of beer from the 70s and the 80s as well, because the majority of it that I tasted was not fucking good. But that's just okay. There is no nasties in that, and that's the main thing. Nasty flavours are what really gets my goat, and which I will knock marks off for. But no, this isn't the worst beer in the world, I have to say. And it's nice. And it's pleasant. It's not a chore. And I'm quite liking it. So yeah. Colour me astounded. So what's the verdict on Bass beer? Well, I didn't have high hopes for this. It was ABInBev. It was macro brewed. It had maize in it. But I'm pleasantly surprised. Now, it's not bowled me over. It's not really, got my taste buds into a frenzy, and it's not really exciting me as much as it should. It did surprise me though, because I had visions of this being a sink job, me going into a rant about ABInBev and macro brewers, but it isn't the worst beer in the world. And if I was having a cook up and doing something traditionally English, this would go perfectly with it. The gravy especially, this would be great for boiling up or adding to, if you're making a steak and ale pie, this would be perfect. It's quite nice. And it's put a smile on my face, because as I say, I was all ready to just dump this. But it's good. I'm going to finish that and I'm going to enjoy it. The fact it's named after the musical instrument that I play is a bonus. But I don't mind it. If I see it again, would I buy it? Yeah, I might do. Depends on the occasion. It would have to be if I was eating something. If I was going to have, I don't know, maybe do a roast for the family or something like that, or bangers and mash. That's one of my specialities, bangers and mash. I fucking love it. It's great. It's really nice. I could even put it in a spaghetti bolognese and make every Italian chef put a contract out on me. Get in touch with the mafia and say, this fucker's putting beer into spaghetti bolognese. I wouldn't do that though. In fact, I have to admit that spag bowl, or not spag bowl, there's no such. You go to Italy, you won't get spaghetti bolognese. You'll get bolognese sauce for Bologna, but that'll be served with something like penne or tagliatelle or something like that. And spaghetti is usually used for, well, not a lot, believe it or not. I think the only thing that you would use it for is a carbonara, and most Italian chefs would say use the spaghettoni for that. But there you go. I'm digressing, and I shouldn't really. I like it. I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. And the reason I'm not going to give it any more, because, as I say, the flavours aren't there. It doesn't really get me excited, etc. But the reason it's got 6 out of 10 is that is an iconic trademark, whatever way you look at it. I like it. I'm going to keep the bottle because I do like that. Nice colours, black and red and gold, perfect. It's a good palate cleanser, as I say, if you're eating fish and chips or something like that. That'd go down brilliantly, that would, with fish and chips. But yeah, put a smile on my face. 6 out of 10. And if you're in the States, I don't know what it tastes like out there, but if you're in the States, this is what beer used to taste like in the 70s. And that's why we were very fucking angry. And I don't think we've got over it. So there you go. And remember, beer is working class champagne.